Welcome to the Mitchell Sentinel podcast with Dan Cannon. And who the hell is Dan Cannon, you might ask? Well, he's my father. And I am Robert Cannon, producer of this show. But he is the talent. In this podcast, we're going to discuss the history of our hometown, Mitchell, Oregon. In today's episode, we're going to figure out how the hell the Cannons got to Mitchell, Oregon. And by the way, this is our first podcast, so be patient. We'll get a lot better at this. So let me introduce the man, the myth, the legend, in at least three cannons, at least three counties, Dan Cannon.
Thank you, Robert.
You're welcome, Dad.
Well, my grandfather came to Oregon in 1866. And how he got here is a complete different story. Robert D. was born in Meade County, Kentucky, right close to Louisville. And he, when he was 6 years old, he traveled down to the Gulf of Mexico with his uncle Robert H.
Was that Gulf of Mexico near Texas?
Yeah, Galveston, probably pretty close to where they got on board the ship. And from the ship, they decided that they were going to go to rather than go around the Horn, they'd go down to the Isthmus of Panama and cross there. So they got as far as the Isthmus of Panama, debarked from the ship, got off the ship, and there they got on mules and rode across the Isthmus of Panama to meet another ship on the other side. And then they came up to Portland, and from Portland they settled in Harrisburg.
Where is Harrisburg exactly in Oregon? I should know that.
It's down close to Lebanon, and between Lebanon and down in that whole area in the Willamette Valley with Brownsville and Harrisburg and Lebanon back in there. They're pretty close. The reason they came, a lot of these old timers came down to Brownsville and settled there because they had a strong Quaker population there, and the people, whether they came by ship or whether they came by wagon, they were pretty destitute when they got here. They didn't have much money, and their food were expended, and about all they got here with was the clothes on their back. So a lot of times the Quakers would take them in, and they would help them and get them on their feet and get them going again. Robert D. was, as I said, was born in 1860, and his mother died shortly thereafter his birth. And his father joined the Union Army. I don't know if they persuaded him to join the Union Army or he did it out of his own free will. But he didn't last long, and he was soon captured, and he sent him to a Confederate prison camp. And while he was there, he contracted some sort of a disease or something, and anyhow he had to go into the prison hospital. Wasn't much, but at 34 years old, he died.
Well, he must have had some sort of wounds, wouldn't he?
I don't know if some wounds or maybe just from the unsanitary conditions they had in the
prison camp.
It was pretty ugly.
I wonder if they didn't treat their prisoners all that well or something.
No, it wasn't really humane from what I gather and what I've read about all the prison camps. From there, he after he died, he had an old uncle, and that left R.D. Pretty much an orphan. And so from there, things didn't look real good around Kentucky for him. So being young and all, and there was a lot of trouble going on, and he had a little net worth, and so R.H. decided that it might be time for them to take off. So that's when they went and made the pilgrimage to Oregon. And after they had lived in...
just a second, though. I was curious, why was there trouble in his, for him in Kentucky? I mean, I guess he didn't have a mother, didn't have a father.
He had nobody to take care of him other than his uncle.
Huh.
And so he had some net worth, a little bit, not much, but he had some, but it was probably well worth, and they thought maybe he might soon join the missing person list.
Because they just do him in and kill him because he's young, or
take what he had and forget the rest. So they decided to just hat up and move west. And they got down there and they settled in, like I said, in Harrisburg, and it rains a lot in the Willamette Valley, and they couldn't take it. And so they'd heard about some of the land and free land up in eastern Oregon. So through some contacts, they moved to Wheeler County. And they settled up in Mountain Creek, which is about 9 miles east of Mitchell.
Well, was it Wheeler County then, or was it Crook County?
It was probably Grant County. That part would have been there, because in the records of where my grandfather married my grandmother, the wedding proceedings and the license said Grant County. So,
and that was roughly 1872.
Yeah, 1872. He would have been 12 years old. He'd spent his first 6 years down in Harris. Well, they'd spent 6 years in Harrisburg, and then they moved back up here.
Okay.
And him and his uncle kind of took him in and took him in as a partner. Really, he's 12 years old, and his uncle's something like 59 or something like that. But anyhow, they went to raising horses and cattle.
What was his uncle's name again?
Robert H.
Okay.
I think the H stand for Harrison.
Okay.
But raising cattle and horses in eastern Oregon at that time was a pretty hard deal, because the nearest shipping point was Cheyenne, Wyoming, which is where the railhead ended. So my granddad, when he got a little older, they put the cattle together, and then he would head east, and he would either buy cattle or he would let some people join his cattle drive, and then they drive them over to Cheyenne, Wyoming, and there they would sell them. And this worked really good for the first 2 drives in the 2 years, but the third one really didn't work out that well, because they'd hit a freak storm in the Rockies, and it was freezing rain. And these cattle didn't freeze to death or nothing, but they just suffocated standing up. The nostrils would froze shut from the rain running off from it. Now the buffalo, he had different nostrils, so he was used to this freezing rain and the weather, and but the cattle were not, and they lost the whole herd there on the breaks of the Rocky Mountains. As time went on, though, the railhead got closer, and I don't have any clue that he went to Winnemucca, but Winnemucca was one of the railheads. But I do have one of where he had then obtained another ranch out on West Branch, which is about 12 miles west of Mitchell.
Which place was it out there?
It's well, I don't know what they call it now, but there've been a lot of owners through the different years, but it at one time belonged to my maternal grandfather.
Oh, so it was that piece of property.
Yeah, and then
up under Richard Butte.
That was kind of a story in itself. My maternal great grandfather, he had got this, and he got in trouble, and he had to borrow some money. So my paternal grandfather, he loaned him the money against the place, and he put the place up for collateral, and he didn't have the money to come back and pay it off. So my grandfather, R.D. Cannon, he foreclosed on it, and it became his ranch. And later on, my dad married Samps Grisham, who was my maternal great grandfather, and was my mother's my grandfather. So consequently, there was kind of a little touchy subject about my mother was always asking my father, said, "Yeah, your father took my grandfather's ranch from me."
Well, but I wonder if there was like a Romeo and Juliet type of scenario there.
Well, I don't know if
like
it was
warring families.
I don't know if it was that romantic.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah, but they had so when the railhead got closer and it came into Prineville, so he would just he would have somebody help him start the cattle towards Prineville, and then he would drive them over to Andy and Vera Onco's place, and they had a good corral, and he'd corral them up for the night. And then the next day, all by himself, he would take them on into Prineville.
And where exactly was Onco's place over there?
It was up Ochico Creek, just right down from the ranger station.
Oh, okay.
And Scissorsville, where the Gold Strike was.
There used to be an old log gas station up there, I remember.
That was where it was.
Okay.
Yeah, it was the old log. I remember years later, we used to go by there, and we'd always make a point. We would stop by there, and I'd get a Orange Crush there at Oncoast. My folks would buy it for me. It probably cost a nickel back in the day.
I bet. Well, now, did he push cows over what they called Val Trail? Was that about that time? Was that, or was it
that was before?
okay.
No, he I think he took them over the old highway.
Oh, what we call the old highway before
Highway 26. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Well, anyhow, he chipped them over there, and it wasn't near as long a drive for him, and they could sell in smaller bunches, and they didn't have to do it, and they didn't have the chance of weather killing and wiping out the whole herd. My granddad was always heard to say when he became a rancher, there was two things he wouldn't do. He wouldn't hire a man that had laced boots or smoked, because that's all you ever got out of them, is either tying their boots or smoking or rolling a cigarette.
I heard the same thing about men that wear gloves.
Yeah.
No lace boots or wearing gloves. Always taking gloves off and off.
Yeah. Always looking for them.
Yep, losing them.
My dad was born in Mitchell the 6th day of November, 1913. He lived here all his life except for a stint in World War II when he was in the Army.
Was he, how many brothers and sisters did Grandpa Cannon have?
Let's see. He was the youngest of, I think there was, I'll get them right here in a minute. There was Jim, Eunice, Georgia, Mildred, Tone, I guess, being the oldest.
Okay.
He had 5 brothers and sisters. My granddad always said my dad was a preacher's boy. And he said, preacher's boy? I said, yeah. For 9 years, his wife didn't have any kids, and they had a revival at the Baptist church there one fall. And he said, darn near every one of them women attended that church revival all came up pregnant come spring.
Well, so when I first heard that when I was a kid, I always thought that maybe that the preacher was very virile, but I later figured it out, is that they'd get all kind of revved up, and the preacher would get them going, and they'd go home and do their business.
Yeah, that's what we're all hoping.
Yeah, well, if not, that's a heck of a preacher.
yeah, that's right. My dad in 1947 was driving a gas truck for Meisner, and Bill Taylor had a service station downtown Mitchell, and so it became available. So my dad took his GI loan, and he bought that place for $5,000.
Now, you guys didn't live in Fossil at the time, did you? I knew you had lived there shortly.
Yeah, we lived there for about less than a year.
And you were born in 1943.
43.
And then Aunt Sue was born in 45?
45.
Okay, just wanted to get that right, kind of get the timeline in there, because so that'd put you right around, 4 years old when they bought the old station down there.
Yeah, that's Crook County's claim to fame. Dan Cannon was born in the old hospital over at Prineville in Crook County, Oregon, so that gives them another claim to fame.
Oh, I got you. Yeah, the famous of more than 3 counties out here.
In fact, I'm waiting for the sign to go up. Dan Cannon was born here, but
well, maybe we'll petition the Chamber of Commerce of Prineville to get that going.
Yeah, I think we may
spread your infamy.
Yeah. I have a funny story, kind of down the road a few ways, but my dad, he hooked up with Les Schwab in 1954. Les Schwab used to come over, and he had a store in John Day, and he would check on his store in John Day, so he always stopped by our house, because my mom was a real good cook, and back in the day, Schwab didn't have a whole lot of money to be buying too much, so if he could mooch a meal, it was good. So I called my dad a Goodyear lover, because my dad sold Goodyear tires. And at that time, Schwab's was just starting his thing, and he'd been in business for about 2 years. He started in 52, and so in 54, my dad ceased becoming a Goodyear lover and hooked up with Les Schwab. Well, my dad would travel about once a month to Prineville for business, but mostly for a haircut, and he'd stop by Jackson's barber shop and get his hair cut and catch up on the local gossip. And so he had a 1967 Pontiac that had hidden windshield wipers. And on these windshield wipers, one day, evidently unbeknownst to him, a policeman at Prineville placed a parking ticket. Well, my dad did not know it was there until he got a nasty letter from Prineville police department saying that he owed a whole lot more money than what the ticket was because it was delinquent.
I guess it didn't rain for a while.
Evidently not, or if it did, it stuck down below the hidden windshield wiper.
And was that the old Bonneville?
Yeah, the old Pontiac Bonneville. So my dad came home and he immediately posted a sign in the window of the store. It says, "Slugs made here for Prineville parking meters." Well, one day Les Schwab was making his monthly pilgrimage to John Day, and he stopped by and he seen the sign, and he did not like any adverse publicity whatsoever, so he thought that was kind of a bad thing for my dad to be doing.
Explain to the folks out there what a slug is.
Slug is a round coin that takes the place of a nickel or a quarter or a dime. I'm thinking back in the day, these were probably nickel slugs.
Well, a lot of times in the outlet boxes, you could pop those out and grind them down a little bit and make its right size as a quarter.
Yeah, it worked pretty good in electrical outlet boxes. Or somebody was doing electrical work, says, "Save your little plugs, will you, please?"
Yeah.
Anyhow, he got this nasty ticket, and he put up this sign that said, "Slugs are made here for Prineville parking meters." And Schwab said, "Hey, this can't be." He said, "How much was the ticket, Cannon?" Dad told him, and he said, "I tell you what, if you take that sign down, I'll pay your ticket." Dad said, "Well, I'd like to do that, Les, because I kind of need the money." But he said, "It's a principle involved here." And he said, I think I'll just make enough slugs to get this ticket paid for myself." So, unbeknownst to Les Schwab, to the day he died, my dad never made slug one. He just said he did.
Well, it was kind of probably good for him to get Schwab's goat a little bit anyway.
Oh, yeah. Well, every now and then he could do that.
Well, there's always been a defiant streak over here on this side of the hill anyways.
Yeah, my dad was dealing with Les Schwab one day, and he sent a truck tire in, got it recapped, and came back and ran about 20 miles, and the cap came off. And so he sent it back into Les Schwab to get it adjusted. And he says it came back non-adjustable. So Dad, he just put it up, waiting for Schwab's pilgrimage trip to go to John Day again. He put this tire out front and put a sign on it that says, "Les Schwab's finest, coal tar and burlap." So Schwab stops by again, and he sees right off the bat, right where he put it, right under where the slug sign was, he saw this tire. He said, "What's the story on the tire, Kenner?" Well, he said, "I sent this in to get it adjusted. The cap didn't stay on only about 20 miles before it came off, and they said it was non-adjustable." He said, "I'll tell you what I'm going to do." He said, "I don't do this very often and probably never do it again." But he said, "You take that tire, you put it in the trunk of my car, and I'll pay for the tire right out of my pocket." So that was probably the first and only adjustment that Les Schwab brought right out of his pocket.
He handled it personally.
Yeah, he handled it personally. So my dad always got the personal touch from Les Schwab.
Well, it seems like he forced it, but he wasn't. Schwab was never, he seemed like he was a fellow that was had a pretty good idea of his standards.
Yeah, I got to tell you a story of that. I think it's either you or Mark. They were out to dinner at the Cinnabar one afternoon, and Schwab and his entourage came in, and I think it must have been Mark. Anyhow, Les Schwab came in. At that time, he was about the same size as my dad, which was pretty big and
quite rotund.
Yeah, real jolly like. And so he looked over there and seen Schwab, and he pointed at him. He said, "Grandpa, Grandpa." Schwab looked back and he said, "I ain't that fat, kid." You want me now to do this poem?
Well, if you want to, but shoot, we can just bull jab a little bit more if you got any more stories.
I've got quite a few, but I want to save some for later because maybe more than 2 people will listen to this podcast, and maybe we can get some more going on
here. Okay, well, go ahead and read your poem.
One of the reasons that I really wanted to do this podcast was to preserve a lot of this history that I have in my head and kind of lay the groundwork and the foundation for my family and my granddaughters. Because one of these days, I'm going to forget all this stuff. And so while it's still fresh in mind, I'd like to do this.
better mind your mind.
Okay, now there's been 3 documented shootouts in Mitchell, Oregon, and there've been a lot more shootings, but these are shootouts. This one, well, it'll tell you in the poem.
Okay.
The first documented shootout that happened in Mitchell was in 1903, the 4th of July. There was a flash flood occurring at the time, so Bridge Creek was roaring high. Herb Pewitt was at the creek shooting at boxes and barrels as they flowed by. Marshal John Stice was nearby retrieving wood by the creek. He confronted Pewitt, or at least he gave it a try. Herb then spied Milt DeHaven across the creek with a Winchester in his hands. Herb yelled, "I think he means to kill me. As soon as I cross this creek, I'll have it out with him, and I'll kill him where he stands." DeHaven started towards Pewitt. Pewitt did the same. Marshal Stice was caught in the middle, still trying to keep the situation peaceful and tame. As they neared, both guns came up. Stice grabbed Pewitt's pistol with his left hand and DeHaven's rifle with his right. Pewitt jerked his pistol out of Stice's hand, fell back, and fired, hitting Stice in the leg. That took old Stice out of the fight. DeHaven and Pewitt fired again. Pewitt fell dead on the spot. DeHaven started running down the road, but Bethune's Hotel was as far as he got. The coroner's inquest was held the next day. J.P. Waterman, the J.P. and acting coroner, found both their deaths were occasioned by the said shooting the day before. Now, Marshal Stice recovered, was involved in gunfights, nevermore. Theorists believe that the shootout involved the cattle and sheep wars that were going on at the time. DeHaven was a range detective, pro-sheep. Pewitt, pro-cattle, with a sheep shooter's mind. Now, here Pewitt was buried in East Mitchell Cemetery and was later joined by his brothers, who were also shot. If the Pewitt brothers were ever gambled, I betting that they were bad ones. Lucky they were not. Where DeHaven's body ended up, no one seems to know. I guess the next of kin claimed it and took old Milt where he needed to go. It seems senseless and tragic how all this event has to end. History tells us that's the way things and these stories went way back then.
Oh, yeah,
that was the first one.
That's pretty good.
Do you want to do the second one today?
Might as well. Shoot, you're on a roll.
Okay. This one happened a little bit later. That another was in 1903. There was one in between Louis Tony and Henry Eller. Happened right in downtown Mitchell, right now between where the old tavern used to be and Judy's place, the Orofino Saloon.
So the tavern, Pinky's?
Yeah.
The Pink Spur?
Pink Spur, yeah. Pink Spur. The one that, in my era, it was called the Pastime.
It was the Pastime, and then like in the, 70s? Is that when Pinky had it?
Yeah. Yeah, I think he brought it probably in the later 70s, but it was built back in the 30s because the first one was just torn down and it was disrepair. So Carl Ringsmeyer, he tore it down and they built a new one. It was a plumbing structure because I'll get into that later in some of the other podcasts about the fires in Mitchell and the wood buildings and how they went up so quick.
Well, it seems like a lot of these older buildings around that time that were built by block. But dang it, they didn't fill any of the cells full of concrete.
Well, no, the concrete, most of the concrete was mixed with concrete, probably cement and dirt.
Well, that makes sense. It's just hard to get out here.
Pea gravel. They didn't have any wash gravel, so consequently it just didn't
It
work.
wasn't the best.
Well, anyhow, this I think about 1923 when Tony and Henry Eller, just funny story. Every time my dad said after that shooting was over, he said that anytime he got in trouble, his mother would say, "Who do you think you are, Henry Eller?" Well, anyhow, he killed Louis Tony and Eller. It was real justifiable, but he didn't write any poem about it.
Okay. Not yet.
Anticlimactic.
Oh, it wasn't that exciting.
No. So we're going to flash forward here, 1946.
So when was the first one?
1903.
1903, and then 1946 was the second one. I'm surprised there wasn't more.
It's the third one, actually, and it so far it's been the last one. We're hoping. Things are not settled that way in this day and age. It's a little more humane. They take you to court and sue the heck out of you.
Something like that.
Okay, this is called the Mitchell's Last Great Shootout, 1946. Tigertown, the saloon business section of the Mitchell, is where this was the scene of this incident. I have researched memories and recollections, and this is near as I can tell it went. Pat Buckley came to town to hoorah and to have a little fun. Got too fortified and carried away. Marshal Monk Bailey warned him, go home, sober up, and return to Tigertown another day. Buckley answered, I will leave, but I don't want it to make it look like you made me run. You wait right here, Mr. Marshal. I'm going home and get my gun. Well, Buckley returned ready, but the marshal was readier. Buckley never got a shot off. The marshal fired straight and true because he was sober and steadier. Well, down went Buckley with 338 wounds in his chest. A crowd gathered around and coincided old Buckley would soon start his eternal rest. Someone in the crowd said, let's get him inside, make him comfortable, put something under his head. Here's a blanket, cover him up. He looks cold. In a few minutes, he surely will be dead. Well, 30 minutes passed. Buckley hung in there, and Buckley didn't die. How about loading him in a car and take him to the hospital? Don't you think we ought to try? They loaded him into Hudspeth station wagon, and off to Prineville they sped. It was truly a miracle that Buckley was still holding on and not dead. At Mossy Rock, the driver lost control of the car and rolled it as they failed to make the turn. The men ascended from the wreck. It was another miracle. They were unhurt, and Buckley was screaming, get me out before this car catches on fire and I burn. Well, they dragged him out and laid him beside the road and hiked to Beaver Guard Station to call for another car. The emergency crew promised themselves to drive safer and slower because they really hadn't made it that far. As the relief car braked to a stop, they threw Buckley in and off they went. Buckley's luck was still holding. It must be truly heaven sent. They finally made it to the hospital. Buckley was even improving, though he was a-getting stiff and sore. The doctor relayed to the crew that Buckley would live, and they were finished with their mercy chore. The doctor also added, or so I have been told, what saved Buckley wasn't their expert care or their safe driving. It was because Bailey's ammunition was old.
That is always one of my favorite stories.
I might tell you how Tigertown got its name.
Yeah.
Downtown Mitchell, as you know now, we have a Tigertown brew pub down there, and it's where my dad's old station was. But at the time, in fact, it is my dad's old store. At the time, Tigertown was the saloon district down there.
And it stretched all the way through downtown and out on the highway because the highway didn't bypass town back then.
Yeah,
so Tigertown was the whole business district.
Yeah, it went clear down to where the Assembly of God Church it is today. It wasn't built until 1947, so at that time it was still Tigertown until the church got here. But that's the reason that they call it Tigertown, because of all the sin that was going on, I guess, through all the taverns and bars and stuff down there.
Well, and then you can't just say Tigertown. You got to talk about the other districts too.
Well, yeah, the other districts was Piety Hill, and Piety Hill is the road up on top on the High Street side and Rosenbaum Street side, and that's where the Baptist Church was, which was built back in 1895. So it became the Piety Hill, and then all the sin that was going on at the time was downtown in Tigertown.
Yeah, it had to be the juxtaposition.
Yeah.
And what was the newest district in Mitchell? It's kind of weird. We only have like 130 people in the town, but we have three districts.
We have what they call it Huddleston Addition now, but back in the sawmill days when things were rolling down here, from about 1938 on up, we were inundated with Arkansasiers and Okies that came out, and I called them Arkies and Okies. Well, anyhow, there wasn't any land downtown available to build any houses, and back in the day, they were kind of discriminated against because nobody wanted to live beside an Okie or an Arkie. So they, I think L.T. Huddleston got together and he bought that land up there, and they kind of made a little subdivision up there. So that's now called, it was called Okie Flats.
Well, it's kind of interesting. Most of Mitchell was settled by people from Kentucky and Tennessee and North Carolina. They didn't like Oklahomans or Arkansans.
Yeah, it was later in time, and I guess I heard one thing about that is all out here following the mill trade, because that's where they came from back there. Did most of the milling and mining. Anyhow, I was trying if I can get it right, and I said they were looking for jobs in Prineville. And I said, "Hey Tex, tell Okie that Arkie got a job down at Ochiko."
Well, we'll have to go into the mining someday, because I remember that R.D. Cannon had a fairly prosperous mine up at Antone. Is that correct?
Yes, I've heard that he at one time he found a nugget. There was a little quartz mixed in with it, but it was pretty pure, and it weighed 25 pounds.
Jeez.
If he would just saved that for his grandson, boy, I would have been flying in tall cotton today, man.
Yeah, you would have been. They'd probably run that up to the stamp mill up there and stamp that. That's for another time. But
Yeah.
I guess we'll close her out today, but thank you folks for listening, and I'm sure there'll be more to come, because the BS supply around here is fairly deep. But anyways, we'll catch you later. You got anything else you want to say, Dad?
Well, if you like what we're doing, just send us your cards and letters, I guess, and this time send us your texts and all your email stuff. And
Well, we'll figure out how social media works and get out there and see. And see. So anyways, give us some feedback and we'll figure it out. We'll catch y'all later.
all right, hope you enjoy.
Bye.